Before cities and empires, we were wanderers on this pale blue dot. Our journey began in flickering firelight, painting stories on cave walls. As tools evolved from stone to bronze, so did we. Now, gaze upon the wonders of ancient civilizations. Pyramids, ziggurats, great walls. This is humanity's greatest journey, written in the stars and etched in stone. Imagine a world where belief could cost you your life, where whispers of salvation echoed through shadowy alleyways, and faith was forged not in cathedrals, but in catacombs. This is the Roman Empire in the 1st century, and this is where Christianity begins. Born in the eastern province of Judea, Christianity began as a small sect within Judaism. Its founder, a carpenter's son from Nazareth, preached a kingdom not of Caesar but of heaven. To the Roman authorities, Jesus of Nazareth was a nuisance at best, a potential rebel at worst. His crucifixion, a routine punishment, was meant to silence the movement, but it had the opposite effect. His followers, fishermen, slaves, women, refused to let the story die. They told of miracles, of parables, and of resurrection, and in doing so, they spread a message that was dangerously radical, that all were equal before God. Rome was tolerant of many gods, but Christianity refused to bow to Jupiter, to Mars, to the emperor himself. This defiance brought waves of persecution. Some emperors, like Nero and Diocletian, made examples of the faithful, burning, beheading, or casting them into the arena. Yet each martyrdom only added fuel to the flame. Despite the bloodshed, or perhaps because of it, Christianity spread like wildfire. Through trade routes, by word of mouth, and across borders it was never meant to cross. By the 3rd century, it had reached the heart of the empire. Then came a moment that changed everything. In the year 312, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, a Roman general named Constantine looked to the sky and, according to legend, saw a cross of light with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether miracle or myth, it worked. Constantine won the battle and the throne. With his newfound power, Constantine did not forget the sign in the sky. He began to favour Christianity, granting it legal status and unprecedented freedom. The Edict of Milan in 313 allowed Christians to worship openly, marking a significant shift in the empire. Constantine's support laid the groundwork for Christianity to flourish, eventually becoming the dominant faith of the Roman world. The very next year, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. Christianity, once hunted in shadows, was now embraced by the sun, no longer illegal, no longer hidden. For the first time, the followers of Christ could worship openly, without fear. Under Constantine and his successors, the church grew from movement to monument. Basilicas rose in place of hidden houses. Bishops gained power, wealth and influence, and theology became a matter not just of faith, but of state. In the newly founded city of Constantinople, his new Rome, Constantine laid the foundations of an empire under God. In the year 325, the First Great Church Council met at Nicaea. Dozens of bishops gathered to settle a crucial question. Who was Jesus? Man? God? Both? Their answer would define orthodoxy for centuries, and with imperial backing it became law. By the year 800, the Church had not only survived, it crowned emperors. On Christmas Day, Pope Leo III placed a crown on Charlemagne's head, declaring him Emperor of the Romans. The message was clear. Earthly power now knelt before divine authority. Christianity had come a long way from the back streets of Rome. It had grown into a global religion, but in doing so, it had become something else too, an empire of the spirit, intertwined with swords, crowns and laws. From a crucified prophet to the coronation of kings, Christianity's journey reshaped the ancient world. It would go on to influence laws, languages, art and empires, bearing both the weight of the cross and the power of the crown. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, among scorched sands and scattered oases, a voice rose from the silence. It was the voice of a merchant, a seeker, a prophet. And it would echo far beyond the desert wind. This is the story of Islam, and how it built not just a faith, but a civilization. 7th century Arabia was a crossroads of commerce and belief. Mecca, the sacred city of the Kaaba, pulsed with traders and tribal gods. But in a cave outside the city, a man named Muhammad would receive revelations that shattered old ways of worship. According to tradition, in the year 610, the angel Gabriel delivered a message to Muhammad, recite, "In the name of your Lord." These words, spoken in solitude, became the foundation of the Quran, and Islam was born. But new ideas often threaten old powers. The Meccan elites resisted fiercely. Muhammad's message of one God, of justice, of equality, upended their world. In 622, the Prophet and his followers fled to Yathrib, later known as Medina. This migration, the Hijra, marks year 1 of the Islamic calendar. In Medina, Islam became more than belief. It became blueprint, governing trade, family, justice, and war. For the first time, a religious community was guided not by tribe, but by shared faith. Within 10 years, the tribes of Arabia, once fractured and feuding, were united under Islam. When Muhammad died in 632, his successors, the caliphs or deputies, inherited not just a message, but a mission. In just a few decades, Islamic rule swept across continents: Syria, Persia, Egypt, North Africa, even parts of Spain. This was not conquest for conquest's sake, it was the birth of a new world order. Under the Umayyads, the caliphate became an empire. Damascus rose as its capital, minting coins and building mosques. Arabic became the language of state, and Islam, once a persecuted faith, now stretched from the Atlantic to the Indus. But rule brought challenges: ethnic tensions, theological rifts, and debates over who could truly lead the faithful. In 750, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads in a revolution of blood and books. They moved the capital to Baghdad, a city that would become the crown jewel of the Islamic world. Here, in this riverside metropolis, a new era would dawn, an age of knowledge, tolerance, and splendor. At its heart, Islam remained what it had always been: a religion of submission to God, of community, and of moral order. But as it grew, so did its capacity to shape civilization itself. From the deserts of Arabia to the palaces of Spain, Islam's rise was swift, profound, and enduring. It forged a new way of life, bridging faith and empire, sword and scroll, prayer and power. And in the centuries to come, this civilization would not only challenge the West, it would enlighten it. While much of Europe slumbered through its so-called Dark Ages, another world was waking up. Here, in the east, under the crescent moon, a torch of knowledge was lit, and it burned brilliantly. This was the Islamic Golden Age, an era not merely of conquest, but of chemistry, calligraphy, calculus, and curiosity. In the year 762, the Abbasid caliphs founded a new capital, Baghdad. Not just a seat of power, but a city built for the mind. Strategically placed between Greek, Persian, and Indian worlds, Baghdad became the beating heart of global knowledge. At its core stood the Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Here, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians studied side by side, translating ancient texts into Arabic. From Plato to Ptolemy, from Sanskrit to Syriac, civilizations were not conquered here, they were collected and preserved. One of its most famous scholars, Al-Khwarizmi. His name would echo through the ages, his writings giving us the word algorithm and the very foundations of algebra. He didn't just calculate, he redefined how numbers shaped our world. In Persia, Ibn Sina, known to the West as Avicenna, compiled the Canon of Medicine, a textbook so advanced it would be used in Europe for over 6 centuries. He described the circulation of blood, the contagious nature of disease, and the healing power of observation. Astronomers like Al-Biruni and Al-Tusi gazed at the heavens, refining models of planetary motion centuries before Copernicus. Their instruments, like the astrolabe, were both beautiful and precise, allowing sailors to navigate seas and scholars to measure time by the stars. Art and science were never at odds in the Islamic world. In fact, geometry became sacred. In architecture, calligraphy and tiling, mathematics gave form to divine beauty. In mosques, intricate arabesques replaced idols. In scripts, letters danced like poetry on silk. Across the sea in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, cities like Córdoba shone with over 70 libraries, well-lit streets and universities, while much of Europe still struggled with mud and candlelight. Here, philosophers like Averroes dared to reconcile Aristotle with faith, and poets sang in Arabic, Hebrew and Latin. Unlike many of their contemporaries, the Abbasid caliphs often practiced pluralism. Jews, Christians and Sabians were welcomed into the world of letters and law. It was not a utopia, but it was extraordinary. In this civilization, knowledge was currency, and books were treasure. By the 10th century, Arabic had become the language of science. From Chinese paper to Greek logic to Indian numerals, the Islamic world became the great translator of the human experience. It was here in this golden dawn that the past and future met and minds touched across time. The Islamic Golden Age did not just illuminate its own time, it lit a path for others to follow. For when Europe finally awoke to the Renaissance, it would do so holding a lantern first lit in Baghdad. Imagine a civilization so vast, its emperors were called the sons of heaven, and its cities thrummed with poetry, porcelain and printed words centuries before Gutenberg was even born. This is Imperial China, in the time of the Tang and Song dynasties, an age of elegance, invention and inner order. The Tang dynasty rose in the 7th century. Its capital Chang'an, one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Merchants from Persia, India and Arabia lined its markets. Buddhist monks walked alongside Confucian scholars and Taoist priests. It was a city not just of walls but of worlds. The Tang court was the theatre of empire. Its rulers projected power through beauty, its politics clothed in poetry. Here, art was not a luxury, it was governance. An official might be judged not just on policy, but on his calligraphy. The Tang gave birth to China's golden age of poetry. Li Bai, the romantic wanderer, wrote of wine and the moon. Du Fu, the moralist, chronicled famine and war with aching precision. Their verses, written over 1,000 years ago, are still memorized by school children today. But even the most radiant dynasties dim. In the 9th century, rebellion and war fractured the Tang, and from the chaos emerged something new, more introspective, more refined, the Song dynasty. The Song emperors ruled not through cavalry charges, but through bureaucracy and books. They expanded the civil service examination system, selecting officials by merit, not birth. To pass was to ascend, to fail was to vanish. This was not aristocracy, this was the empire of the scholar. The Song era was also one of dazzling innovation. Movable type printing, pioneered by Bi Sheng, transformed knowledge from privilege into permanence. The compass pointed Chinese ships across the seas, and paper money, invented centuries before Europe adopted it, made trade lighter and faster in an empire that ran on silk and salt. Where Tang culture sang in colour, Song culture whispered in ink. Landscape painters like Fan Quan and Guo Xi did not merely paint what they saw, they painted what they felt. Mountains drifted like dreams, water flowed like thought. This was a civilization that saw nature not as something to conquer, but to harmonize with. Song cities like Kaifeng and later Hangzhou were marvels of urban life. They had tea houses and bookshops, night markets and fireworks. Some had over 1 million residents long before London or Paris could claim the same. It was here in these teeming streets that a quiet revolution unfolded, one not of war, but of paper. The Song era also saw the revival of Confucianism, now infused with metaphysics. Zhu Xi, a towering intellect of the 12th century, reframed the cosmos through reason and ritual. He did not preach to kings, but taught that even the humblest person could touch the universal order through study, discipline, and moral clarity. Together, the Tang and Song dynasties built a world of subtle strength and stunning serenity. They gave us woodblock printing and gunpowder, paper money and porcelain, a government of scholars, and a culture of enduring grace. Even in decline, their legacy outshone their fall. For in China's long history, these centuries remain a pinnacle, when the empire was governed not only by law and army, but by brushstroke, star chart and verse. Long before Columbus ever touched the shores of the New World, vast civilizations had already risen. In the dense jungles of Central America and the snow-kissed peaks of the Andes, great empires aligned their cities with the stars, carved their gods into stone, and ruled with power and precision, without wheels, iron, or even written alphabets. This is the story of the Maya and the Inca, two of the America's most extraordinary civilizations. The Maya civilization emerged in what is now Mexico, Guatemala, Belize and Honduras, a land of rainforest and revelation. At cities like Tikal, Palenque and Copan, they raised pyramids as precise as they were grand, aligned not just to the landscape, but to the very heavens. The Maya were master astronomers. They tracked Venus with astounding accuracy, predicted eclipses, and created calendars more precise than any in Europe. To them, time was sacred. It moved in cycles like the stars, and every moment had meaning. They also left behind one of the ancient world's most complex writing systems, Maya hieroglyphs. These symbols recorded royal lineages, wars, offerings, and myths, etched into stelae or painted onto fragile codices. Only a handful survive. Most were tragically burned by Spanish conquerors. Religion and science, blood and beauty, all intertwined in Maya life. Their ball games were not mere sport, but sacred ritual. And at the heart of their cosmology, a belief that human action could influence the gods, and that the heavens watched everything. Far to the south, among the soaring Andes mountains, another empire emerged, just as breathtaking, just as brilliant. The Inca called their realm Tawantinsuyu, the four regions united. It stretched over 2,500 miles, encompassing deserts, rainforests and high plains. From their capital, Cuzco, they built the Capacnan, a 25,000-mile road network that bound the empire together. Engineered without wheels or horses, these roads crossed mountains, rivers, even vertical cliffs. And along them marched armies, messengers and rulers guided by memory, not maps. The Inca had no written language, but they devised a system both ingenious and mysterious, the Quipu. Knotted strings recorded census data, taxes and history, a tactile archive of empire. To this day we're still deciphering their code. They were also brilliant engineers. On mountainsides they carved terraces that fed millions. With no iron tools, they cut and fit stones so precisely that not even a blade of grass could pass between them. And at Machu Picchu they built a citadel in the sky, both fortress and sanctuary, untouched for centuries. The sun, Inti, was at the heart of Inca belief. Emperors claimed descent from him. Their rule was divine, and their deaths not the end. In tombs, royal mummies were kept, dressed and consulted, as if they still reigned among the living. Time, like the sun, never truly set. But no civilization shines forever. In the 16th century, the Maya cities had already begun to decline, while the Inca met something they could not chart nor conquer: steel, guns, disease. The arrival of the Spanish shattered worlds that had lasted for over 1,000 years. And yet, though the temples are worn and the languages near forgotten, the spirit of the Maya and Inca endures. In the starlit rituals, in the stones that still stand, and in the memory of civilizations that touch the sky by charting the cosmos and shaping the earth. The empire had fallen. Rome, once mistress of the world, was now a shadow of its former self. Roads cracked, cities emptied, literacy faded. What rose in its place was something far less grand but no less enduring, a world of lords and vassals, of oaths and ploughshares, of cathedrals rising as empires crumbled. This is medieval Europe, where faith held what kings could not. Out of this vacuum grew a system both fragile and binding: feudalism. At its core was an exchange land for loyalty, protection for service. A lord granted land, called a fief, to a vassal, who in turn promised to fight when called. Beneath them toiled the peasants, bound to the land they could never own. This was not a state. It was a patchwork of personal bonds, stitched together by duty and steel. But amid the sword and soil, one institution endured and expanded: the Christian Church. As kings rose and fell, the Church stood firm, keeper of knowledge, tradition and truth. It baptized kings, crowned emperors and excommunicated sinners. Its bishops wielded more power than barons. Its monasteries preserved ancient texts while teaching new generations, and its language, Latin, became the thread that tied Europe's many tongues together. Within the stone walls of monasteries, a quiet revolution stirred. The rule of Saint Benedict guided monks to live lives of obedience, poverty and study. They planted fields, treated the sick, and copied books by hand. These were not just spiritual retreats. They were the libraries, hospitals and universities of their time. In the year 800, a bold experiment was attempted: the revival of the Roman Empire under Christian rule. Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne, king of the Franks, as emperor of the Romans. It was more than a ceremony, it was a statement that spiritual authority now crowned secular power. This Holy Roman Empire would endure, at least in name, for 1,000 years. But faith was not always gentle. Starting in 1095, waves of crusaders marched east to reclaim Jerusalem, fueled by piety, plunder and papal promise. At home, those who strayed from orthodoxy, heretics, were silenced, often violently. And in 1054 the Church itself split in two: Catholic West and Orthodox East, a divide that persists to this day. Despite its rigid layers, feudal society was not stagnant. Trade revived, towns grew. New ideas whispered through stained glass and scripture. But cracks began to form. Plagues, famines and uprisings challenged both lords and clergy. And as the Middle Ages waned, a new light stirred in the West, one born not of fealty but of thought. Medieval Europe was a world in between empire and nation, between ancient glory and modern reason. In its ruins we find the roots of law and liberty. In its faith, the seeds of both unity and division. And in its fields and cathedrals, we see the silhouette of a continent rebuilding itself, stone by stone, prayer by prayer. There was no road, no single path carved in stone, and yet for over 1,000 years goods, people and ideas flowed across continents, connecting China to Rome, Mecca to Venice, Samarkand to the steppes of the Himalayas. This was the Silk Road, a network not of empire, but of exchange, a highway for spices and scriptures, silk and stories, plague and prophecy. It began in the 2nd century BCE under China's Han dynasty. Silk, that shimmering secret, was the empire's most prized export. Soon traders ventured west across deserts and steppes in search of jade, horses, glass and gold. By the time of the Tang and Abbasids, this ancient artery pulsed with life. Cities like Samarkand, Kashgar and Merv became the crossroads of the world, where languages tangled and cultures mingled. A Persian merchant might sip tea with a Turkic guide, while a Chinese envoy discussed astronomy with a Syrian monk. Here, no one empire ruled. It was a marketplace of minds as much as of materials. Silk was just the beginning. Paper, invented in Han China, transformed the Islamic world. Copied by hand in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, it allowed knowledge to multiply. Porcelain, light and luminous, fascinated Europe. Spices, once worth more than gold, infused kitchens from Venice to Delhi. And along with goods came something far more potent: beliefs. Buddhist pilgrims carried sutras along the Silk Road to China, where the teachings flourished, took root, and took on new forms. Islam spread eastward not just by sword, but by merchant and mystic, adapting to Persian poetry, Indian logic, and Malay tradition. Nestorian Christians carved churches deep into Central Asia. Jewish traders built networks from Baghdad to Kaifeng. The Silk Road didn't just move things, it moved thought. But not all that travelled the Silk Road was a gift. From the steppes, a silent killer hitched a ride west, carried by fleas, ships, and fear. In the 14th century, the Black Death swept across Eurasia. 1 in 3 Europeans would die. The very veins that had once carried silk now flowed with sorrow. In time, empires fell. The Mongols who unified the Silk Road fractured. New sea routes began to eclipse the old landways, but the legacy of connection remained. Europe's Renaissance would owe much to the books, maps and ideas that came from east and south through the Silk Road. Even today, in our globalized world of instant messages and high-speed trade, we walk paths first trodden by camel and caravan. It was not one road, but many, not one culture, but all. The Silk Road wove a fabric of humanity, where silk met scripture and strangers became storytellers, a road where civilizations didn't just collide, they conversed.